My name is Linda Kuhn. I'm Dean of the Honors College, and we still have got people rolling in. We've got a great audience for a super important and impressive Honors College signature seminar, Food Matters. Before I introduce our triumvirate of brilliant faculty, I'm going to do a little bit of advertisement for our upcoming signature seminar sneak previews. A week from today, we have a sneak preview of Global Social Change featuring the Director of International Studies, Professor Lawrence Hare, a faculty member in International Studies who specializes in global humanitarianism, Dr. Jared Phillips, and from the Walton College of Business and the World of Entrepreneurship and Food Scarcity, we have Rogelio Garcia Contreras, and they will be giving a sneak preview of Global Social Change, Tuesday, September 29th, 5:15, same kind of scenario. Our sneak preview for our fourth Honors College Signature Seminar will be on Monday, October 12th, 5:15 p.m., featuring Dr. Timothy Landry, Anthropology of Religion, who's doing a January intercession called Witchcraft. So if you can't take the class, you would like to join us, please do so. But tonight, it's my amazingly great pleasure. In fact, oh my goodness, we've got some amazing alumni from Bumpers College out here. Check it out, Victoria Malek and Olivia Calloway. Oh my goodness, very exciting. Anyway, I'm Linda Kuhn again, Dean of the Honors College, and I am introducing our Spring 2021 Rockstar Honors College Signature Seminar, Food Matters, Food Matters, the matter of food, and the trinity of awesome specialists that the Honors College has brought to the table. First, we have Margaret McCabe, Dean of the Law School, expert in food law and administrative law, awesome decanal colleague, and very interested students and working with any of you all that are thinking about going to law school. And Margaret has a lot to offer on the sort of legal side that I think will be very surprising to many of us. And Margaret is joined by my colleague and my partner in crime, Associate Dean of the Honors College and Professor of Agricultural Economics, Dr. Jennie Popp. And Dr. Popp comes to us with a whole range of experience in sustainable farming, in food, and the economics of food and farming, and she's absolutely brilliant. And students, you will want to know Dr. Jennie Popp because she has all the money in the Honors College. She's sitting on top of a big pile of money for undergraduate research and study abroad and internships. And then, of course, my neighbor and cousin, the Associate Dean of the Graduate School of International Education and also the Chief Senior International Officer on campus, University Professor, Distinguished Researcher in Horticulture, and he's sitting in an apple orchard. It looks like he's in Colorado. He's in his natural habitat with apples. Of course, Curt, who needs no introduction. And I think that everyone listening is going to find this subject fantastic. And I think I'm going to say an ending a little disturbing when we get to the world of almond milk and beyond meat. But I don't want to give anything away, so I'm going to be quiet. We're going to hear from our speakers. And then I'm going to turn over the session to two awesome Honors College ambassadors, and that's Kendra Risner and Sheridan Chandler, and they're going to moderate the Q&A. So, my trio, have at it.
Thanks, Dean Kuhn. I'm Jennie Popp, as Dean Kuhn said, and it's my pleasure to get us started this evening with a slide that I want you to take a look at of this map, and take a look at where all those animals are. You see the white sheep and the brown cows. We're going to revisit that later on this evening. But I'm honored to be joined this evening by my colleagues Curt and Margaret McCabe. Agriculture is a subject that's near and dear to our hearts. After all, it's the source of all our food, and other food matters. So I'm going to turn it over to Curt to start addressing the question for us, why food matters.
Next. Thank you, Dr. Popp. You know, food matters because we need it. I have to admit, I like to eat. And because I like to eat, I like food. I assume you do as well. Food is really important to us. Food is necessary for life. Our species, we're at the top of the food chain. We have created food tools. We have large brains that make food decisions. We cultivate, produce, and consume a lot of all kinds of food. We eat for subsistence. It powers the energy for all of our activities, whether that be labor, artistic and creative, intellectual or innovative. Without food, we wouldn't be who we are or what we are. We couldn't do what we do. Food is vitally important and interrelated to our health. And as they say, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Next. Food matters because it's important to who we are, our culture, and our society. Food is part of our culture and our traditions. Memories are made around the table. We actually have a food memory. In times like a pandemic, we seek comfort food. We celebrate with meals. We have food with families. We eat food with our friends. We celebrate religious rituals around food. We bridge cultures and explore the world through food. What are we having tonight? Is it Italian, Japanese, American, pizza, sushi, burgers? Food is just part of who we are. Next. Food matters because it has a profound effect on the environment. Food is inextricably intertwined into the world and our environment. How we use land, how we use water, how we use energy, and what we do with our waste. What happens to food during hurricanes, droughts and floods, freezes, heat waves, and fires. The sad reality of food production is the impact on the environment, but that's being addressed through sustainable, resilient agriculture research, discoveries, technologies, and applications. Farmers are becoming capitalists with a conscience. You, as a consumer, aren't sitting idly by. You, who are at the top of the food chain, determine what happens with every bite you take. How much does food matter to you? Your vote counts. How do you use your food votes? Next. Food matters because it dictates how we use the land. A significant portion of our land is dedicated either directly or indirectly to the production of food for ourselves and for others. The land is our resource, and we use it to produce our food. It is determined by our individual and our collective food choices. You can see from this schematic how land is used in the United States. What percentage of land inside of the red box is committed to components of our food system? Food matters because food choices dictate our landscape. Next. Food matters because it's an incredibly complex system. Our system has three primary components: the production, the farming, or the product supply side. The other side is us, the consumer, the utilization side. And those are bridged by food manufacturing, distribution, and sales.
All right, Curt.
Beg pardon? We are?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Many factors affect production, distribution, use, and consumption. The physical environment, the meteorological environment, the economic environment, the sociological environment, the legal and political environment. Nothing of our food system exists in isolation, but it is highly interconnected. Everything is connected to everything else within inside of our food system. Back to you, Dr. Popp.
Thank you very much. What we plan to do is take a case study approach in this class. We're going to look at 6 different foods, many of which are in our promotional image that we use there. Now, how are we going to bring this all together? Well, we plan to utilize peer-reviewed literature, university and industry research, legal cases, news stories, and invite guest speakers who are experts in these topics to better understand why and how food matters. We're going to try to highlight the legal, the production, the environmental, and the socioeconomic issues associated with 3 of the topics here. We're going to present those all to you tonight in summary form, and then just give you a tease of the other 3 topics. So, Curt, can you get us started with the production approach?
Sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Popp. The focus of my part of the course will be the perspectives on farming and farmer decision-making, the impacts and the connectivity of the food system and how that affects what we farm, where it is farmed, why it is farmed, and farmer decision-making. We'll discuss the interrelationships between farming and the environment. Farming is an environmentally dependent and also environmentally limited system, which can in turn positively or negatively affect the environment. For example, the Great Dust Bowl era of grain producing regions of Colorado, Kansas, and Oklahoma, where an agriculturally induced catastrophe that destroyed agriculture production in that region for a decade or more. An agricultural production system changed the environment and resulted in damaged lands, families, and communities. This led to a philosophy of ecological agriculture and restorative, resilient agriculture, new production technologies. In my view, these principles are probably now more important than ever before. Farming and production adds to our plate, our food choices. Farming contributes to communities and the economy. There are some difficult and sad realities about the environmental impacts on the food production system on our land and the environment, the ecology, and the climate. These are changing, and new ideas and understanding and developing technologies for sustainability and resilience are on our horizon. We will discuss some farming perspectives on food. Food matters from a farmer's perspective. Dr. Popp, what about the social sciences?
Well, let me tell you, Dr. Rome, when we're looking at things through a socioeconomic lens, we will be looking at both economics and people. As Dr. Rome's already said, all of humanity is part of the market for food. We're either consumers, producers, or both. And anytime we introduce or remove a food product from the market, there are extensive implications through the supply chain. Anybody who's taken an economics course knows that we look at the pros and cons and the benefits and costs. I want you to think back to a time in your life. I bet you can probably come up with an example of a particular food that you grew very fond of, and then for whatever reason, you couldn't find it in the food market again. You were sad, right? Maybe even a little angry. But the implications are much broader than that, because the food that we eat, or the source of that food, is often also an input into other edible and non-edible products. And when a new product is introduced into a market, it's rarely an absolute gain, because purchasing that new product often means you're now going to buy less of something else. There will always be winners and losers. We're going to take a look at those winners and losers in the food system, including those implications for U.S. farmers and for consumers. Now, you probably thought we forgot about our 3rd presenter, but we're going to introduce Dean McCabe now to tell us a little bit about the legal perspective.
Thank you so much, Dr. Popp. And welcome, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be working on this project. What Drs. Popp and Rome just introduced to you, that kind of production consideration, the consumer consideration, I want you to think about how much of that is actually encoded in our laws, or drives decision-making from the perspective that my two colleagues just talked about. And what you'll find is that our modern system of our modern food system is really supported by a complex system of law and regulation, not only at the federal level, but also at the state and local level as well. And so much of Food Matters actually really relates to our democracy. And as Dr. Rome talked about, you have a vote, you have all kinds of votes in the food system. And we'll be able to revisit how the courts frame those votes in some ways. So understanding Food Matters really is going to require our students to get into the nitty-gritty of how our government works. And as we discuss law within our case studies, you'll be exposed to statutes and regulations and administrative decisions, as well as case law. I want you to think about two pieces of constitutional structure. The first that we refer to in law is that horizontal structure. So the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch in our federal system are seen to be co-equal branches, and each of them have a role to play in the food system. But there's also another axis that we think about, and that's the vertical system. And that's how the federal law, the state law, and the local law all have to align within our legal system. And in the food system, that's really fascinating. And tonight we'll hear a little bit about, through the lens of apples, how all of those things have to line up, or actually you have a legal problem. So tonight we'll talk again about some cases, and these materials will really show you how our democracy seeks to balance the variety of interests in the food system. And I think we just heard a long list of them from Dr. Popp and Dr. Rome. And so in part, the rule of law is to reconcile those interests and create a system that is balanced. And one of the other questions that we want to think about this semester when we're thinking about legal issues is, where do these laws come from? Are they based on science? And I don't just mean, let's say, bench science, the ag sciences, chemistry when it comes to pesticides and things like that. It's also the social sciences, like economics, like social science. And so where do you see science supporting law and decision making? And similarly, where do you see values in our law that are reflected further in our food system, particularly how we value farmers or don't, particularly how we support those who are food insecure. And the law has a lot to do with that. And then finally, in that question of where does law come from? Is it science? Is it our values? Is it something else altogether? What do you see in the law and how it relates to Food Matters will be something we'll spend time talking about. So by the end of the semester, I really hope our students will be able to see through the lens of food how our democracy is delivering on this important idea that was captured in the preamble to the United States Constitution. And this, I hope, sounds familiar to many of you, but if it doesn't, this is why we have a Constitution. This was the goal of our founders. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Well, that's why we established the Constitution, folks. And hopefully you will see through Food Matters how that document lives today in those votes that we make every day when we pick up our forks. Next. So Dr. Popp mentioned case studies, and I'm just going to run you through the 6 that we can expect this semester. And as we said, we're going to go into them a little bit more deeply, 3 in this talk, and we'll give you an overview of 3. So an apple a day is one of our case studies. And what does the simple staple teach us about the food system? You're going to find it's not so simple. And got milk? Really? I think Dean Kuhn mentioned almond milk. Is that really milk under federal law? something milk-like. We'll talk about that. And then what is Palm Wonderful? How did an obscure fruit become the star of an entirely new beverage sector, as well as a Supreme Court case? How did that happen? It's a really fascinating story. We're also going to talk about going against the grain. What are genetically modified organisms? We'll unpack this controversial ag and consumer issue and look at how it's shaped ag tech, labeling, as well as international trade issues in the law. Flowing from that is our case study, Don't Mess with Texmati. If you are a rice consumer, you've probably seen Texmati rice. Rice is a mainstay of our economy here in Arkansas. And in this case study, we'll learn a little bit about intellectual property, branding, and product identity in ways that I think will really surprise you. And finally, last but not least, meat. It's what's for dinner. Just like milk, I want to know, is it meat or is it meatless meat? Can I even say that on a label without risking being charged with a crime? I think you want to know the answer to that. Don't I have free speech rights? Can I say that on a label? Those are our 6 case studies, and I will turn it back to myself, I think, for an apple a day intro.
Dr. Rome.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Dean McCabe. A for apples, great place to start. Really nothing is more iconic than an apple. I grew up on an apple farm, and to be absolutely honest, I've spent most of the last 4 decades trying to understand how to help farmers grow better apples that consumers can enjoy. They are iconic. You've probably heard it said, nothing more American than apple pie. The state flower of Arkansas is the apple blossom. They are iconic for health, for education. They do have significant health benefits. Apple farmers have to consider the best and most economic ways of producing fruit, and fruit that consumers will eat. There's an old farmer joke. What is worse than a worm in an apple? A half of a worm. Think about it. Let me ask you what kind of apples you prefer. Do you like hard, starchy, unripe green apples, or ripe, colorful, crunchy, flavorful, or kind of soft and shriveled? Do you like disease scars on your apple? A clean, beautiful fruit? Do you mind a half of a worm in an apple? What does a farmer have to do to produce a ripe, crisp, flavorful, colorful, pest-free, attractive, delicious apple? The apple that a consumer would enjoy and is willing to pay a fair price for. We often refer to it as the apple industry, but really it's thousands of individual farmers, individual business persons, and entrepreneurs. There's lots of questions on the farming side to be considered. Should the consumer appreciate and consume apples grown the best way that farmers think that they should be grown? Or conversely, should farmers grow apples the way that consumers want them to be grown? What are the trade-offs for apples that consumers want? Should farmers be allowed to use chemicals that could cause cancer in a consumer? But what if the rate of cancer is only 1 in 10 million people? What if the chemical residues are below detectable levels? Should farmers be allowed to use technologies that make apple production and distribution more sustainable? Should something as pure as an apple be genetically modified with modern technologies that can save energy, create a riper, crisper, more attractive fruit, a fruit that requires less pesticides, less refrigeration, will last longer without spoiling in your refrigerator, and less waste in the food system? Does that change the apple? Or does that change the way we think about the apple? Those are some real questions. Those are the questions that farmers think about every day in the orchard. Dr. Popp, what are some of the socioeconomic sides of the story?
Well, when we look at apples, one of the things we're going to talk about, and Dr. Rome's going to walk us through this in the course, is what's been the history and the consumption of apples over time. And what I can tell you without giving away Dr. Rome's story is right now, apples are still the #1 fruit consumed by U.S. U.S. consumers. However, in the last few decades, that number has fallen every year, the amount of fresh apples in particular that we consume. And as an economist and somebody who's interested in consumer preferences, I believe the consumer rules. And some of the folks that are leaders in the fruit industry agree and say that there's a number of reasons why we see shifts in preferences from apples to other products. And to give you an idea of some of the things we're going to talk about, one of the things that a lot of the marketers believe is that there's an oversupply of varieties of fruits. Dr. Rome asked you, how do you like your apple? And he gave you a gazillion choices. And for some of us that love apples, that's fantastic. And for other folks, it's too much information. And where do we find that balance to know just what types of varieties that we should be offering our U.S. consumers? Another thing that we found out is that other fruits are more available. You know, when Dr. Rome and Dean McCabe and I were younger, you didn't see so much variety of different fruits around the year. Fruit was only available in season. But now I can go to the store any time of year and find strawberries and grapes and other things. Whereas those more perishable products that you only used to be able to get during in-season time are now available year-round. And that's cutting into some of our demand for apples. Apple production in the U.S. is still strong, but we're seeing more and more of those apples being shipped overseas, or actually not really overseas, over land to Canada and Mexico. So we're able to maintain our apple production, but who's consuming them is changing. But even when we're exporting them, there's a lot of marketing issues that have to be considered. And one of the big ones you'll learn is that the state of Washington is the biggest producers of apples in the US. But surprisingly, they don't have a marketing board for apples, producing 70% of the nation's available apple supply, and no marketing board. Maybe Dean McCabe can give us an idea of why that happened and what other issues legally are surrounding apples.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Popp. I just want you to know that as tech would have it, I have lost my Zoom connection at home and have now converted to my phone. So I hope you can hear me and we are rolling. Great, thank you. So I ask you, true or false, federal law governs how apples are sold in the United States? Actually, true. It's a trick question. Could be false as well, and why? I want you to just think about walking into the grocery store here in Arkansas or in Washington State or in New Hampshire. The apples you see in the store don't just get there because somebody is picking out the pretty apples and putting them on the shelf. They actually have to meet marketing standards. And those marketing standards are typically a question of state law, not federal law. But those laws must comply with the US Constitution, and in particular, a very powerful component of the food system known as the Commerce Clause. In Commerce Clause cases, the question is whether one state's regulation places an unreasonable burden on interstate commerce. And what that really means is our courts have recognized that we have a national economy. And so each state can't protect its own markets by creating barriers to entry for other states' products. And so in 1977, this was in many ways sorted out by the United States Supreme Court in the Hunt case, where the Washington State Apple Advertising Commission took on the North Carolina Board of Agriculture. And you want to note there some interesting dynamic already in our food system. Two states suing each other in federal court over what apples can be sold where and under what kind of labeling. Sounds like quite a showdown to me. But how was that worked out? Well, the basic issue there was that Washington state standards were higher. They were some of the highest in the nation because that is a state, as we've just heard, that produced a lot of apples and had a very vested interest in making sure that the Washington state brand of apple was competitive and was seen by consumers as a high quality product that if they looked for Washington state apples in the grocery store, wherever that was across the nation, they could be pretty sure that those were going to be delicious apples. So North Carolina, trying to promote its own apple growers, said, hey, actually in our state, the only way you can ship apples in from Washington is they don't get to say they're Washington state apples out on the outside of the box or on the little stickers that we might see today. At that time in 1977, we didn't have those stickers, but those remain relevant today. North Carolina's law actually said, if you're shipping in from out of state, the only thing your box can bear is the USDA grade and nothing more. So North Carolina consumers under that regulation didn't know where the apples came from. So the Washington marketing power is essentially canceled by the North Carolina law. And North Carolina argued in the US Supreme Court that they had passed their regulation to ensure that their consumers had access to uniform apples wherever they came from across the United States. The standard should be the USDA standard and nothing more, and that anything more, such as a state's claim that its apples were superior, was fraudulent and deceptive. I bet they didn't like that in Washington. And so really Washington argued, well, hey, this is a big disadvantage to us because that removes our competitive advantage and consumers should be able to know that Washington apples are Washington apples. The Supreme Court found in favor of Washington state, and North Carolina's just general grading was seen as violating the Commerce Clause. And so that's a case where everyone in the system was at that time in 1977 not sure whether you could say a Washington apple is a Washington apple and get some market advantage from that. And I'd like you to think about, in that case, who prevailed in the food system? Was it the Washington growers? Was it the North Carolina consumers? Or was it all American consumers under the Commerce Clause? Next slide.
Dean McCabe, that was really fascinating, but is there anything legal associated with milk?
Oh, you know, it's kind of a lawyer's dream, Dr. Popp, honestly. Milk has fascinated me as a lawyer and many lawyers. Same thing as with apples, right? We have people who are producing milk, small scale, large scale, different kinds of milk, might be dairy milk, might be these other things that we might call alt milk. Throw raw milk in and RSBT or hormone injected cows, and you just have really a free-for-all in terms of lawyering. There are also really, to be honest, to just distill it, marketing, labeling, definitional, environmental, animal welfare, and safety issues all wrapped into one product. This is also milk, dairy milk, one of our federal government's most favorite products to promote. I want you to think about, if you're familiar with it, My Plate, the US Dietary Guidelines visual, which actually has a circle standing for a glass labeled dairy. Dairy is not necessarily its own food group to nutritionists. It might fall under the protein category. But here in the United States, under our dietary guidelines, dairy is really one that is promoted. It is a nutritional powerhouse, but it also raises some really interesting issues in terms of some of the more complex issues of the food system touching on social justice. It's been pointed out by scholars that for many Black Americans who are lactose intolerant, the promotion of milk by the US government is highly problematic and should be rethought. And it can also be highly allergenic for some people. And when it's the only dairy product, or when it's the only option for a school lunch program to have milk, what does that do for people who can't drink milk? But of course, the question of the day, as Dr. Popp has really alluded to, is what is milk? We'll discuss the USDA and FDA unenforced definition until very recently. There has been a legal definition of milk, but it hasn't been enforced by the federal government. And in that lack of enforcement and the reliance on that by industry, what grew up? Silk, almond milk, oat milk. And with that, we have a real question now in the food system of what is milk. And if you're an alternative milk drinker, you may have noticed lately many of your labels have stopped using the word milk and started using the word beverage, oat beverage, soy beverage, almond beverage, but not all of them. So this is actually a live legal controversy that I'm looking forward to discussing with the class in the spring.
Thank you very much. Well, what I can add to that is, as all these changes have happening, we've seen a sharp decline in milk drinkers. Since the 1970s, US dairy milk drinkers have fallen 37%, 37%. And dairy milk sales have dropped 20% from 15 billion to 12 billion just between 2011 and 2017. But on the other hand, we see that other beverage products made from soy, oat, and almond have grown in popularity. The sales between 2012 and 2017 more than doubled from just 900 million to over 2.1 billion. The question becomes, though, who's the clear winner? Or is there really a clear winner? On one hand, we have the two top dairy companies in the US, Borden and Dean, that in the last year filed for bankruptcy. This puts into question, a serious question, the future of US dairies and the plight of US dairy farmers. But on the other hand, we see that the production of plant-based beverage inputs often face production challenges as well, related to pollination of plants, a lot of water use, what their nutritional value is, and their environmental footprint. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rome to tell us a little bit about some of those things. Dr. Rome, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. You know, I love milk, and I love milk and cookies. But at what cost? Dairy milk has significant environmental impacts, but those impacts are counterbalanced by the nutritional components of the food that we enjoy with our cookies. People do love their milk or their beverages. Many people, for a range of nutritional, health reasons, cost, or environmental reasons, have switched from dairy milk to other so-called milks. As we've heard, almond milk, soy milk, coconut milk. And those consumer decisions impact farmers. People are switching from dairy milk to plant-based milk in part because they want a smaller carbon footprint. However, plant-based milks may have other environmental impacts that are not taken into consideration fully. For instance, almond milk. Almonds, like soybeans, are typically grown on large monocultural fields and have significant impacts on biodiversity, soil quality, pesticide concentration, herbicide weed resistance. Among the more vital issues with almond milk is the use of pesticides and water. In particular, it's important to note that 91% of all almonds produced in the United States come from California, on relatively large almond orchards or ranches. Almonds have a considerable environmental impact on biodiversity and on their ecosystem, may be larger than dairy milk production. The Pesticide Action Network identified 9 pesticide residues in almonds, including 5 that are toxic to pollinating honeybees. These pesticides may also enter subsurface irrigation waterways and our food system by indirect means. Almonds are significant water users for production and are grown only in very arid regions requiring irrigation from subsurface water aquifers or distant reservoirs. Almond water production competes with urban water consumption. Water use is important in all of these beverages. For instance, dairy milk requires about 30 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of dairy milk. Almonds require about 23 gallons of water for every gallon of almond milk. On the other hand, almonds aren't exposed to antibiotics or hormones that are typically used in conventional dairy production. But now, because of consumer choice, organic dairy milk without the use of antibiotics or hormones is a major segment of the organic food trade, and that's driven by consumers. The dairy industries, although largely concentrated in California, Wisconsin, and Idaho, with California having 18% of the dairy production in the United States, dairy production occurs in all 50 states. The ecological impact is distributed and therefore somewhat diluted. The economic impact is also distributed. There is no simple, clean-cut answer to which is best. Life cycle assessment of dairy production, almond production, soybean production are helping us understand the system better, develop research and farming practices that will reduce ecological and climate impact of those beverage systems. Those are the kind of things that we'll talk about in classes. With that information, informed consumers can decide. Dr. Popp, what about palm?
Let's ask Dr. McCabe first.
So I have a question for everyone. What happens when a 100% pomegranate blueberry juice loses market share to Coca-Cola Corporation product that was just 0.5% pomegranate blueberry juice product? If before I even read the slide, you thought litigation, come see me at the law school. You're destined to be a lawyer. This is, we just talked about 2 pretty conventional and standard American products, right? Apples and milk in so many lunches across the country every day on our tables. Palm is different, but palm is a great way to learn about a few things. First, innovation. Who looked at a pomegranate and said, hey, I know, we can make $1 gazillion with a juice called Palm Wonderful? Not that many people would have that thought, but people did. And from that came a product. And we'll talk in the class about that first step and how the product was marketed and how it gained market share, making health claims, which I might preview for you, may have been a little problematic for the FDA. When you say your juice prevents cancer, you may need to really tell the FDA how you know that. And so that's a good legal issue. We'll also end with a really complicated area of food and competition law, which gave rise to my question. Often when somebody creates a product in the marketplace that's wildly successful, what comes next is a flood of competitors. What's a food producer to do? Well, what you'll find in class is that there was a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court to clarify this question. Could Palm sue Coca-Cola for taking its market share away? Could it do that? Well, in fact, it could, under a federal law called the Lanham Act. And while ultimately Palm lost its case for damages against Coca-Cola, that was before a jury. That was before a jury of consumers and eaters and drinkers. And they got to decide whether or not Coca-Cola's product really unlawfully was competing with Pomm. And one of the things I'm really excited about is that we have connections here at the university with a lawyer that represented Pomm before the US Supreme Court case and in the California jury trial. And so we will get a really front row view of what it meant to represent this innovative food company in its battle to maintain its market share in the lucrative beverage market. And so with that, I turn it back to Dr. Popp to talk about how do you stay alive in a market when you've been through this kind of litigation?
Well, you're going to have to wait a little longer to find out. We're going to turn it back to Dr. Rome first.
You know, pomegranate, fruit from Eden, fruit of the gods. Although fictionalized in Renaissance painting that apples were the tree of truth and knowledge, and I believe there's a lot of truth and knowledge in an apple, if a Garden of Eden existed in the Fertile Crescent, it was more likely to have been a pomegranate. It's the fruit of heaven. The pomegranate industry in the United States is a very, very localized industry. The fruits are easy to grow if you have location, location, location. You need the right soil, the right temperatures, dry, sunny conditions, and lots of water. Among all of the crops we're talking about, pomegranates are a relatively small farming business with only about 33,000 acres. 90% of the US production is in one state, California, and in one county. It's an irrigated crop grown in deserts, modified with imported water. Economically, it's really important to that county, to those communities and those families. Farmers produce pomegranates. It's a perennial crop with relatively high carbon sequestration early in its life, but the rate of carbon sequestration decreases with age. Pomegranates have relatively low pesticide use, mostly due to the lack of federally registered pesticides because it's such a small and sometimes considered insignificant crop. There is significant use of alternative or organic remedies in pesticides. There are now developing pest problems within the production regions because it's a concentrated cropping system and there's now imported pests coming from around the world. Sustainability life cycle assessment shows pomegranates are almost carbon neutral, if not carbon positive, until they reach full production. Then, because of the energy required in harvesting, processing, storing, squeezing, they become greenhouse gas producers. But they're relatively low compared to so many of the other crops we're talking about. They're not a bad crop. There is an energy impact to producing pomegranate juice and then transporting it. Fresh pomegranate consumption in the United States is very limited. Without juice production, without juice consumption, there wouldn't be a pomegranate industry in the United States. Is there going to be a comeback from pomegranates, Dr. Popp?
Will there be? Well, what we can talk a little bit about is what Pomm is trying to do to make that comeback. If you haven't had the opportunity to do so, I suggest you go to YouTube and look up these two commercials, Impaled by a Dolphin and Better Than Ever. That was their first unique advertisement, and then their more recent one called Worry Monsters. Pomm took a kind of tongue-in-cheek look at themselves and put out these humorous ads, and were able to even push through, Dean McCabe, some of that preliminary research telling us again about how good these products may be. Was that successful? We'll find out. Well, the folks who own the Pomm Wonderful Company are friends with Martha Stewart. And they had Martha Stewart go on to Today, and she also has a video where you can see her make her famous Martha-Rita that is being made not from lime juice, but from Pomm Wonderful. Does it taste good? Did it help the company? Come to class and find out. And finally, on a more serious note, over COVID times, we know a lot of people are trying to become more healthy. We're all worried about COVID, so what are things we can do to make ourselves healthy? Well, again, the wonderful company turned to Maya Feller, who is a respected registered dietitian, to try to help them promote their product in the future. Did it work? Has the Palm product bounced back? What about the faith of the other wonderful products that they sell? Well, you'll have to come to class to learn more about it. One, I'm going to keep you interested, and two, we're getting close to running out of time. So we're going to rather quickly now tell you a little bit about the 3 other topics that we want to present. And I'll turn it back to Dean McCabe to get us started.
Great. I'm going to give us a quick overview of our case study against the grain. This is about GMOs. GMOs, as you may know, are kind of born of science and a desire to increase yield and nutrition, increasing durability for shipping as well as shelf life, and decreasing ag chemical inputs. The first GMO product was on the market in 1994. You may think that this is a recent thing, but 94 is a long time ago. Controversy is broad, some concerns obviously about human and environmental safety, also a lot of concerns about the collision of farmers' rights and corporations' rights to their intellectual property. So the legal battle in this area has really focused on things like, can farmers seed save if it's a GMO crop and they've cut open a bag that has a licensing agreement on it? Our Supreme Court weighed in on that issue. So did many around the globe. Same things about super weeds as well as pollen drift. What if I'm an organic farmer next to a large conventional farm using GMOs, and you want to know what happens when my soybeans that were labeled organic test positive for GMOs? I lose money and I sue and I try to get that money back. And so we'll also touch a little bit on the global marketplace. Our GMOs are not welcome in some places like Europe and China. And what happens if I'm a farmer who loses my market contracts because of cross-contamination in the shipping process? Who do I sue? That's the lawyer's question when the farmer comes in and says, I've lost money. And so we'll also talk briefly, I hope, about CRISPR. CRISPR is a new technology that allows, again, modification of ag products, not by inserting a gene, but by editing out a gene. Is that different? Are the same consumer issues there, the same legal issues there? Dr. Rome, I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in a little bit on against the grain and rice before we take up Texmati and meat.
You're muted.
I'm going to use rice as the bridge between those issues. So what about rice? Rice is a major crop in Arkansas. 49% of the domestic rice production in the United States occurs in this state. We grow it on approximately 1.3 million acres. There are more than 25,000 Arkansas jobs related to our rice industry. It generates $4 billion of value at the farm gate. But what if we change rice to make yellow rice? Or what if we came up with alternatives to rice? Is that really rice? If we change it to make yellow rice through genetic modification, or we use cauliflower to create cauliflower rice, is that really rice? Cauliflower rice is actually made out of part of the cauliflower plant that can't be sold to consumers, or out of heads that consumers would not find accessible or acceptable in the marketplace. So we make a product that looks, feels, and somewhat tastes like rice. But is that really rice? Using cauliflower rice, we make cauliflower more sustainable. But is rice production in Arkansas sustainable since it's a major producer of greenhouse gases? Lots to be considered in the rice story. Dr. Popp.
Dean McCabe.
Or Dean McCabe.
Getting this good. We're able to pass the baton pretty well. And Dr. Rome had it just right. As we've been talking this evening, milk. Dr. Popp's going to introduce us to his meat. Meat is rice. And don't mess with Texmati, by the way. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is some of you may be enjoyers of champagne. Does champagne come from California? No, It does not. It comes only from France. And the question that we might talk about with Texmati is, you can see on the slide, you'll see basmati rice. And there's a international standard called a geographical indication. And something that we're going to look at is what happened again with the law and this product called Texmati. And can a Texas and Arkansas company called Rice Tech patent basmati rice? Well, you know what? In 2002, they tried to, and the USPTO actually did grant the patent. But then India appeared and said, wait a second, basmati is our rice. It is not your rice to patent. Nobody owns basmati, and if anybody owns basmati, it's Indians. And since then, the Indian government has been pursuing a geographical indication for basmati rice. And Texmati, though, has remained on the market. It's been controversial. Its seed strength has also spawned some litigation here in Arkansas. And over the last 5 years, the US has imported about 9% of its rice, much from Thailand, jasmine rice, and India, and basmati as well. So there's an opportunity for Arkansas growers to actually have a basmati-like product, but can they call it basmati? We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about geographical indications. And then, as Dr. Rome said, what the heck is cauliflower rice? Well, the Arkansas legislature last year said it's nothing you can label here in Arkansas because rice is rice. And if you call it cauliflower rice, that's not enough. Rice has to be rice. And so we'll talk about that state law issue as well, which is very similar to some issues that I think that Dr. Popp now will talk about with respect to meat. Is it what's for dinner? You tell us, Dr. Popp.
Is it? Well, on some families it is, but as we can see, the popularity of plant-based meat products has soared in recent years. Look at that in terms of how much it's grown in popularity. If you were an investor, for example, in Beyond Meat and the Impossible Burger Company have made loads of money. If I had bought stock 18 months ago in the IPO of Beyond Meat, I would have made a 6-fold return on that investment. It's a missed opportunity, or is it? We shall see. Why do people choose these products? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Some of them have to do with nutrition. Some of them have to do with footprints. We're going to talk about that as well. And before working with Dean McCabe, I would have never guessed that the way that my label looks like on my meat product or on my meat is really a question of free speech. We're going to dive into some of that. Now, we keep talking about protecting the definitions of different products, and we do know that protecting the definition of meat is going to be important for both animal producers and their processing counterparts, but we also have to think about the availability of those products for other things. We talked earlier how a lot of our foods, or the things that our foods come from, end up being inputs to other products. So you can see here on this slide, just looking at swine and cattle, and there's dozens of products that are made from byproducts of those animals. If we suddenly have less meat available, will it mean that we have less of those products as well? We'll explore those areas. And if we're going to have meat-based burgers, they have to be made from something. They've typically moved to using peas and soybeans as their primary ingredient. And Dr. Rome's already told us about some of the challenges with that soy production. If we have to rely more on soy that only grows fairly well in the center of the country, either the price of those items is going to go up really high, or we're going to have to rely on imported products. And that has its challenges as well. But one of my best favorite parts of this story is that the people who are fighting back, whether you're a meat eater or not, this is a fascinating story. I hope by the end of our class, you will become really comfortable and understand what metabolites are and know what a merit is. And if you want to learn more, you have to come to class.
And that's exactly right. Just some quick housekeeping about why you'd want to come to class and how it will enrich your life. We're going to read from peer-reviewed literature. You'll have primary source in the law. You'll also have exposure to USDA publications, FDA publications, and of course the popular press. Food matters, always an important topic in our national news. We'll have instructor-led discussion as well as guest lecturers and hearing from the experts. And in the end, you'll get to tell us what matters. Your presentations will be on conclusions drawn from our case studies, and we'll learn a lot from you. So we really want to do that, so you need to come to class.
Dr. Rome?
Yes, our class is going to be spring 2021. It's going to meet in person Tuesdays and Thursdays, 9:30 to 10:45 a.m. The location will be in the Honors College Lounge. So we invite you to join this class. We have lots to talk about, as you have seen. And it's very interesting, it's very complicated, and we hope to create informed decision makers, where those decision makers are the producers, the consumers, or the adjudicators in our legal system. If you have additional questions, make sure you feel free to contact any of us. Here are our email addresses. We hope to see you in class.
Thank you, Dr. Rome and Dean McCabe. And Dean Kuhn, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Food matters. Let's give them a hand. And students, I've put the link to the application